Hello, I'm Owain, I'm 25 and I'm a bus driver. I currently live in Wrexham in North East Wales with my wife and my hopefully very soon to arrive young son. As you can probably tell, I'm currently sat in my car outside Wrexham Mail Hospital waiting to see what happens over the next coming hours and days. But I've been asked to do this video to give a bit of a background on my Welsh culture and identity and how that's impacted me growing up within the church and how that's kind of given a bit of a background to my Christian faith and how I've seen that. Now, to those of you that might not understand or know or have any background of understanding of the Welsh identity, being Welsh is unlike anything else. It's all I've ever really known. I've grew up to two Welsh parents. I'm very lucky that Welsh is my first language. Welsh is a very evocative, very poetic language. Wales is the land of fire, the land of legend, the land of myth. It's a very rugged landscape. It's very, very, very countryside orientated. There's a lot of green pastures, green land, and a lot of working class areas. You know, we've got the coal mines and the collieries of South and West Wales. You've got the farming land of West and Mid Wales. You've got the farming land of North Wales, but you've got the slate mines, you know, that were in Northwest Wales, the brick kilns and such things of Northeast Wales, and the collieries as well. But Wales is a very working class part of the world. It has no airs and graces. And the language, to some extent, is very similar. The language captures more than just a way of communicating with others. It's a way of life. We think of Wales and we think of Eisteddfods, competitions of poetry, of singing, and such things, and shows a real cultural identity. But as much as Wales is a country of such things, Wales is also a country that is often caught out thinking of yesteryear, thinking of what history was once like. And the churches and chapels of Wales quite often fall into the same trap. They often think about what the churches and chapels used to be like. They will lament the fact that churches were once full to the rafters with hundreds of people on a Sunday that would come and worship the Lord. And often the people can feel very disheartened when they see chapels and churches that not only close down, but also, if they are open, may only have a handful of people. My father's a minister, and in some of those churches, in fact, in many of the churches, you may only have a handful on a Sunday. But I think something that we need to especially in Wales, something we need to understand is that actually the church is more than just a building on a Sunday. It's more than just 10 o'clock in the morning or 10:30, whatever your tipple is. It's more than just that. It needs to be the identity. It needs to be part of the community, and it needs to be more than just thinking that it is the service. We often talk about the missing generation. You know, people like myself, I'm in my 20s, as I said. We often think of the missing generation, i.e. the people in their 40s, 50s and 60s that perhaps didn't grow up around the church. Their parents and the generation above them might have been regular chapel goers and church goers, but the generation below has missed it. Now, we often think about actually how do we need to get our generation into church? But actually, how do we need to get our generation to talk about God and to understand Christianity and to see the ways and the power and actually the trust that we can offer in him? I think us as young people, when you are living in a countryside area or a working class area, it can be very difficult to prove this and almost to have the faith and understanding. Sometimes we think of Christianity as being a very highbrow subject, about something that only intellectuals can go for, or how we see certain posh areas and how difficult it can be to reignite the flame in working class areas, particularly amongst young people. Now, I'm sure many of you watching this will think about times when you're hanging out with your friends, or you're at school, or you've just finished a school day, or you're on a weekend and you think, what have I got to do? lots of villages and towns up and down the country, especially in Wales particularly, have that problem. And things like this can manifest what is often known as antisocial behaviour. But often the root of it is not in the people themselves, but it is actually in our activities and our day-to-day lives of actually what have we got to do. And I think something we need to try and understand is how God plays a part in our lives and how God does indeed have a plan for us. We often hear about God's plan. We often hear about the importance of trusting him and trusting what he has for us. But we've got to understand that as young people, we can often be very impatient. We can often think that we need to be masters of our own destiny. I know certainly I can hold my hands up and say that often I've thought, no, I'm going to do this, or been impatient and thought, actually, no, this is what I want to do. I don't want to trust or wait, because why should I? And quite often, it does only come with maturity or with experience or with understanding that actually we see that maybe sitting back and understanding and trusting is actually the best way of going about it. But quite often we need to have mistakes to see what actually we should have done right. But as young people, I think that's very difficult to do, particularly when you're surrounded in an area where there is almost nothing to do, where it's difficult to find activities, it's difficult to find friends to be with, and particularly difficult if you have maybe certain interests that it's quite difficult to find other friends that have. I think we need to try and reimagine the importance of having God in our lives, that actually it's not about the building at 10 o'clock on a Sunday, that it's not a building that we worship at once a week, but actually it's so much more than that, that God is an integral part of our lives, that God is a part of everything that we do, whether it be at work, whether it be at school, whether it be at college. And I think this is something that we need to try and capture. Now, myself as a Welshman, we very often find ourselves trapped, as I mentioned, in that thing of talking about what it was once like, how good the chapel once was. Well, the chapel and the church can be as good as ever. God is still here. God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The Holy Trinity has stayed the same no matter what. But for us here in 2021, we look back at what a year, what an 18 months we've had, and something that we could never have in our wildest nightmares, wildest dreams have ever thought of. But actually we need to capture this moment and see, how do we grow the church? We almost feel like in some stages of the country, in some places of the country, that we are very much at an all-time low. We're at the lowest that we've ever reached. There's talk at the minute within Synod of closing churches down because the numbers are not enough. In Wales, that would decimate a lot of our churches, a lot of communities. But actually what we need to try and do is reimagine what we have. We need to look at the importance of what these churches have brought to the community and actually how they were able to be pinnacles of the community. A church is still a church, and there are people who still find it deeply important to find the service on a Sabbath. But it is so much more than that. The church can be such a focal point to go out into the community. Closing churches is something that will never, ever be helpful. It will never, ever be something that will find success, because it is so much harder to plant a church from scratch than try to reimagine a church that we already have. Quite often we find ourselves trapped in the ability of thinking this is how a church has always been. And we're very good in Wales, particularly, of saying this is how it always was, this is how it's always going to be. I pray and I ask for you as young people to look at the future and pray and say, actually, what have we got as a church already? Maybe you attend church, maybe you attend Sunday school or Christian groups, but I pray for you to look and say, what have we got and what can we as young people do? What can we grow from this? Rather than close it and turn the door, shut the door and walk out, what can we as young people do to make things better? And I pray and I ask that every single one of you think, actually, you can make a difference. Because believe you me, as tough as it might be, you can make a difference. The church cannot stay and say, we did it this way, so this is how it's going to be. I ask you as young people, please, and I pray that we can say, we can make a difference and we can trust each other and trust God. Amen.